Hi, welcome to Something Simple and Light with Tolu Alao. In this podcast, we talk about three key areas: process improvements, manufacturing excellence, data analytics, and visualization. The goal of this podcast is to discuss practical ways to improve your operations day in, day out. Wow, there's so much to cover in these episodes, and I really hope that you pick one or two things that you can apply in your operations immediately. Fantastic. Let's jump into today's discussion. Fantastic. So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about excess inventory, a mask for inefficiency. Right at the beginning of this podcast this season, we talked about value, and I'm going to be making some inferences and building on what we started in episode 1. So if you've not learned or listened to episode 1, I suggest that you want to listen to episode 1 on value before coming to this episode. Right, all right, let's jump into today's episode. So when we talk about excess inventory is a type of waste, right? And just like we talked about waste is the opposite of value, right? When we say we have some sort of waste, then I'm saying that value has not been created. So when value has not been created, when you've not added value, what you have done is that you have created waste. So if I go through an operation, so I go through a series of steps and I have not yet created value, right? I do not have something that the customer is willing to pay for. I do not have a product that meets the requirement of the customer. Yes, I have produced something, but customer is saying no, this is not what I want. That is waste, because I have to now go back to now rework this and create something that the customer can actually pay for, right? So waste has to do with when value is not created, right? And this is why it's important that you listen to the episode on value where we took time to talk about value, because waste is the very opposite of value. When you do not create value, you have created waste, right? So again, waste is something that the customer is not willing to pay for, right? Your customers are not willing to pay for your inefficiencies, for your extra steps, for your over processing, for all the mistakes, for not getting it right the first time. Customers don't want to pay for that, right? They don't want to pay for things that do not satisfy their needs, right? And that's something to think about critically. So we have different types of waste, right? In fact, we have as high as eight types of waste. In some other circles you could have 9 or 10, but I want to focus on excess inventory today, right? But let me just give you a quick overview. We have 8 types of waste that are commonly known, and we have an acronym for those of us that use Lean. We call it TIMWOODS. That's TIMWOOO, that's OODS, and each of these letters stands for a particular kind of waste, right? And so we have waste that is related to transportation, that's the T. We have waste that is related to inventory, which is what we're going to talk about today. We have waste that is related to movement, right? Movement, excessive movement. We have waste that is related to waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, defects and skills, right? And all of that forms the 8 types of waste that we have, right? So in this episode we're going to focus on excess inventory. And why I chose to start with excess inventory, because this is something that I believe that you can quickly fix in your operations, and it's so common, right? It's so common, and you would understand why this kind of waste, this excess inventory, is so common in businesses around us today. All right, let's jump into what we want to talk about as it relates to inventory. Okay, so in terms of inventory, so when we say inventory, and if it's a term you're not familiar with, I will break it down a bit for you. So inventory has to do with goods, right, or materials that a business holds for the purpose of selling or using in production, or for one form of utilization or the other. So your operation is designed in a way that you have certain materials, certain goods that you use to produce your finished goods, right? So for instance, let's use our eatery example, my favorite kind of example, right? Let's say for me to produce jollof rice, right, I need to have an inventory or a stock of raw rice. I need to have inventory of tomato paste, of oil, right, of salt. Those are things that we call inventory. So I hold the inventory for all these things for the purpose of transforming these things to either finished goods, semi-finished goods, or for some sort of utilization or the other, right? Or even just to sell them directly, right? So this is what we call, or this is what we refer to as inventory. And what you would notice for your operations and with the experience is that the cost of storing or maintaining or monitoring this inventory can be significant. In most businesses, this is like the single largest cost, right, of maintaining inventory. So for instance, let's say I have to store rice, then I have to store it in a proper location, so that might require some form of environmental control, right? So in my rice example, I need to store it in a cool, dry place, right? That means that this place has to be secluded from water, from wet, from access to moisture, right? That might mean I might need to have some form of ventilation in that place. That might mean I might need to have some storage facility. For instance, you don't want pests like rodents to you don't want to come to your store one day and see that rats has eaten your rice, or you have droppings, or you have some form of infestation, right? So all of that requires some form of cost to maintain, right? You need to also maybe build a system around managing this stock. Somebody has to take note of the quantity that you have, right? You might need to employ somebody to manage all this inventory, right? And all of this. So this means that keeping stock or maintaining stock can be expensive, right? And you don't want to keep more than is required, because you have to talk about storing, right? If something happens to, imagine I have 100 bags of rice, right? And then there's an infestation or there's theft or something, the loss is going to be very significant for my business, right? So it's important that stock or inventory is kept in the right amount, right? And we're not having more than is required at any time t, and then we're able to get the most value out of all of this, right? Because again, the customer is not going to pay for the cost of maintaining stock that is excess, right? So in a way, right, when you think about inventory is money sitting on the floor, money tied, right, and you're not able to get the most out of it. So you don't want to have more than is required. So imagine I have 100 bags, and in a year I cannot consume more than 10 or 15 bags, right? That's 90 bags or 85 or 75 bags too many, right? Because I can buy rice later. Yes, you might say that the price will change, but when you look at what's the cost of storing that rice for 1 year that I will not finish, what's the cost of maintaining records, of employing somebody, of managing pests, of infestation, all the associated costs with sustaining and maintaining that inventory, right? This is how you want to think about it. So excess inventory is not something that you want to keep if you don't have to keep, right? And all of that. So let's move forward and think about this. So why do we even have excess inventory in the first place? Why do businesses, or why do operations end up having more inventory that they actually need, right? And one of the first things that you want to think about is that many times inventory is used to cover up for certain inefficiencies, and that's why the title of this episode is called Inventory or Excess Inventory, a Mask for Inefficiency. And what typically could happen, or one of the reasons why you could have excess inventory, is because it takes you a lot of time to get this inventory. So for instance, you have a very long lead time for suppliers to get this stock to you. So let's go back to my rice example. So assuming rice was an imported material, right? Something that comes outside of the country, I need to import it, and importing means that it might take 3 months for it to come to me, right? And this is just an example. There are a lot of examples of this in our operations where you have materials that takes 6 months. In fact, some materials can take 1 year because the supplier might need to create the material for you. It's custom made. It's not something that they make down, right? They don't make to stock. And so it's something that you need to order for. They get your requirements and then custom make this material and then send it to you. And so let's say there's a very long lead time. So what typically happens is that because of this very long lead time to get this material, what you want to do, or what most people end up doing, is that they overstock, they over request. So I might need 20
right, for the next 6 months, right? But because it's going to take a very long time, I will say, you know what, give me 40, right? So that I know that I'm going to keep using this. And then when I know that I have 6 months stock left, I would request for another, extra. And then depending on when this comes, I factor how long it will take and inefficiencies here and there. I'm going to have to ask for more than I need, right? And that's one problem, right? You're trying to cover up for long lead time. Another issue could be, long setup time or long changeover time. So for instance, you know that, oh, if I'm making, and let me just use my eatery example as always. So I have different things on my menu, right? I have jollof rice, I have fried rice, I have Chinese rice, right? And let's say, for instance, it takes me 1 hour to make jollof rice. It takes me 3 hours to make fried rice, for instance, right? Now, in making fried rice, I know the quantity of fried rice I need, but because it takes me such a long time, I might think that, what, let me make more fried rice than I actually need. Let me make excess fried rice, because if it finishes and customers come and they're asking for fried rice, they will not wait for 3 hours, right? So let me make more than is required, and then you end up having excess fried rice because you're trying to cover up that long changeover time or long setup time, right? Another reason why we have excess inventory, or why you might have excess inventory, might be the quality, right? So if you have a process where again, remember, why we have excess inventory most times is because of inefficiencies, right? So again, you might have a system that ends up producing things that are not good quality. So let's say you have a defect rate that is as high as 20%, which is ridiculous. That means for every 100 pieces that I produce, only 80 will be good, right? And 20 will be defective, right? Now, what that means is that if I have a demand for 100, I need to produce way above 100, right, to cover up for my low quality, right? So I might need to produce, 150 or 120, such that I'm able to at least get, 100 good pieces that I can use, right? So that's another reason why you might have, excess inventory. Another reason why you might have, excess inventory is also unbalanced workload, right? So you have a situation where maybe you work Mondays to Fridays, but of course you still might need to open on Saturdays, Sundays, and there's no production happening on Saturday or Sunday. So you end up producing more than is required on maybe Friday or Thursday, and because you don't have that balanced workload, or you have production happening only in the mornings, and then you have demands that are 247, right? So you have to overproduce at certain points, have excess inventory to cover up for that unevenness, right, in your production, right? Another reason why you might also have excess inventory is poor maintenance, right? So you have a situation where you know that your machines are unreliable, they can break down anytime, and in order to buffer yourself or save yourself the hardship in case your machine breaks down unexpectedly, right, due to your poor maintenance, you end up producing excess. You are producing more than is required because you want to be able to cover up for again, you're covering up for inefficiencies, right? And so you see that many times, right, most often than not, we have excess inventory because there's something that we're trying to avoid, and in order to be safe, we're producing more than is required, right? And this is normal, right? So the question now is, how much of inventory is so bad that I'm guaranteed to have a waste, or how much do I need to produce where I have some form of safety net, and even if I have some form of waste, it's not so significant, right? And so the critical thing here is finding the balance between having so much waste and having just the right amount of buffer stock that you can manage, right, in your process. All right, so let's move to the next portion of this podcast where we talk about how do you reduce this your excess inventory. How do you design your process in such a way that you are able to reduce your excess inventory and then maximize your cash flow, and not have money sitting on the floor, right, and all of that. All right. Okay, so how do you reduce excess inventory? How do we minimize, the amount of money we have sitting on the floor doing nothing, right? So one of the first things you want to do is to do proper demand planning, right? And demand planning is such a critical part of reducing, excess in the inventory because it allows us to accurately, to a large extent, determine what is the actual demand for my products, right? And this is why data is so important. You can't even do any form of process improvement, right, without having the right data and properly analyzing, synthesizing that data, right, to get the right insights, right? So you want to be able to tell, based on historical trends, based on, campaigns that you might have, based on promotions, based on the seasonality, and all of that, right? This is the actual demand for this particular product, right? This is the actual demand I have for jollof rice in a month, in a week, for this particular quarter, and then work your way backwards, right? So from this demand, right, how much do I want to have on ground in terms of safety stock or buffer, right? And without the right data, it will be difficult for you to accurately, at least to a level of degree of accuracy, right, determine how much demand is required, right? So what happens is that because you're running the business based on gut feel or what you think or people are talking about this and not actual data, right, you might end up overestimating or underestimating, right? So what you want is a tolerance that is not so high and so low, such that in the eventuality that there's a surge, right, in the eventuality that customers demand skyrockets, you are still able to at least meet most of that demand, if not 90%, at least most of that demand, right? And if the demand is not as expected, at least it's not going to be so wide. So at least you want a situation where your demand planning is done in a way where you're able to capture as much value as possible, right, without compromising on your quality and your cost, and all of that, right? So demand planning is such an important element of managing excess inventory, right? The next point you want to do is to manage the how you purchase your raw materials, right? Not just the quantity, but even when it is needed, right? So you want to manage the when and the quantity, right? How much, right, of raw materials when you purchase it. So I'm not purchasing materials that I might not need in the next 2 or 3 months now, because that means that that's money I could have used to do something else, right? And the second half to this point is managing your suppliers, having a good collaborative relationship with your suppliers. So you want a situation where you can negotiate with your suppliers to produce or provide certain materials at particular times, right? So rather than them giving you 100 bags now, you want to be able to say, you know what, we'll have a deal. I will pay you, this amount, certain amount, but I do not want to receive, all the materials or all the goods immediately, right? I don't want to, take all that risk immediately. So I want to be able to collect, this in 20 bags now, then in the next quarter collect the next 20 bags, and then in the third quarter collect the next, and so on and so forth, right? So you want to have that kind of relationship with your suppliers for your critical goods, for your goods, such that you're able to collaboratively come to a point that works for everyone, right? You're not having more than you need, and whenever you need, you can get it. Another additional point, and this is something that we've talked about as reasons why you might have excess inventory, is also having some form of negotiation to have materials reduce the lead time. So for instance, I talked about importing things abroad, right, bringing things from abroad. Is it possible for us to get alternative local suppliers for those things, right, which can act as a backup, right? Can I get other alternative vendors and compare and see, okay, can this be brought shorter? If I engage them earlier, can they give me better deals, right, to have this done, come closer? For instance, now remember that we talked about doing proper demand planning. If I know that in my entire financial year I will need this product in November, right, and I start having a conversation early enough with my supplier, it might reduce the amount of time, I'm able to get this, because they are able to properly plan their own, their own raw materials, their own plan, and serve me better, right, versus doing something, impromptu, and creating a lot of chaos left, right, and center. So it's something you want to think about, right? Managing your suppliers, managing, you know, having alternative suppliers, having alternative local suppliers, and seeing how all of that can help reduce, the lead time to getting your critical, products and all of that, right? The next thing you want to also do is to reduce the buffers between production steps, right? And this is also about, proper demand planning. It's about proper, production planning and having a sense of what demand is required, right? So for instance, because we are trying to ensure that, we have constant supply for our customers, what happens sometimes is that we build buffers in different steps. So for instance, I know that I need a certain quantity of, rice to produce jollof rice, but in order to get to the point of, getting jollof rice, I need to boil the rice and have white rice, for instance, right? So let's say in my own method of cooking jollof rice, I first make white rice, and then that white rice, which is a semi-finished product, can be used to make jollof rice, or it can be used to make, fried rice, right? So I might say that, let me cook so much white rice, so that depending on what the customer wants, I'm not starting from raw rice, I'm starting from white rice. I can quickly make it jollof rice, or, end up making it fried rice. But I might now, in order to now catch up with this demand, I might have created such a large buffer, right, to say, what, even though the usual demand for jollof rice is 10 plates, for instance, let's do, 50 plates of white rice, and then just in case, and you're having more buffer than is required based on that, right? So what you want to do is properly analyze and see your demand, and then you can have some safety stock, and then build something that is reasonable. And of course, over time, you test and fine-tune your demand plan, right? So that's something you want to think about, reducing buffers between production steps as you proceed, right? Another thing you want to think about in terms of reducing your inventory is prioritizing your fast moving goods that have high value, and then moving to the fast moving goods that, are low value, to slow moving goods that are, high value, and so on and so forth, right? So the point of all of this is that you want to, again, based on data, determine products that are moving fast. So for instance, you don't want to, have a stock of goods that the average, the average inventory turnover is like 30 days or 40 days, and then stock that, takes 2 days to finish, you're already out of stock, right? And all. So you want to have stock for goods that are moving fast, right? You're able to quickly get, your return, quickly convert it to cash, right? Versus having goods that, you eventually sell them, but it might take you 60 days to sell, right? So you want to, again, based on data, right, stock up on things that are moving fast, and I don't have so much stock for things that are not moving so fast, right, and all of that. So those are things that you want to think about critically as you think about how you manage your stock, how you manage your inventory, and all of that. All right, fantastic. I hope we've been able to pick one or two things from today's podcast. All right, so let's look at our task for today. Simple task, right? So think about your inventory, think about your operations, think about your process, and ask yourself, what inefficiency am I trying to cover up with my excess inventory? What am I trying to avoid? What am I trying to, mitigate by producing more than is required, by storing more than is required, by having more than is required in terms of my materials, right? So think about your operations, look at it critically, look at the numbers, get the data, right? And then look at it and take a decision, make a call as to how you want to, reduce that inefficiency, or, altogether eliminate that inefficiency. Fantastic. I trust you've been able to pick something from today's episode, and I look forward to hearing about your success. For more content like this and to keep in touch, you can follow me on LinkedIn at Tolu Alao. You can also subscribe and follow me on YouTube also at Tolu Alao. Until next time, just give me something simple and light.